What is going on, guys? Welcome to another podcast, and today I'm joined by Namora. I've met Namora through men's group, so I often talk about this men's speak run by Kenny Mamarella de Cruz, and yeah, he I met Namora through there, and ever since we've talked, there's definitely aspects about Nomura that I really wanted to delve deep into, especially around his work around genocide and activism, working with refugees and many other things around that topic. So we're going to delve a little bit into this. It is quite long in terms of like the depths we go into compared to some other episodes, but I'm hoping it will facilitate more people to come out and talk about this openly. And if you are interested about talking about these kind of topics, make sure you reach out to me. If you enjoy this podcast, of course, give it a like, subscribe on Spotify and on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, also leave comments down below because it does allow me to get more reach and get these messages out there to more people who need to hear it, more men that need to hear it. And yeah, that's me. Enjoy the podcast. If you have any questions, feel free to message me. Also, you can DM me on Instagram. But otherwise, enjoy the episode and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Welcome, Noah.
Hi, Jack.
And for those who are watching, me and Noah are just discussing this, and I want to start with a 2 minute silence. So normally we do this at the start of a men's group in person, and I know Namora has been to many men's groups, so I thought it would be a good way to just start. So if you're happy to Namora, I will ring the bell and we'll take it from there. Yeah?
Yes, please.
Bene.
How are you doing today? We'll start with a check-in.
Let's see. I guess I'm feeling quite good. I was sick earlier in the week. It's the first sickness in a long time, which has really knocked me down like that. Um, I'm recovered, although I feel like my body's still a bit weak. So all things considered, I'm good. I do feel a bit nervous. I always feel a bit nervous when I'm on something and someone's recording. I feel quite a bit self-conscious of it. Um, Aside from that, that's it. I'm good. Bit nervous. Not sick anymore. Thank goodness.
Perfect. I feel, yeah, I felt a little nervous when I rang the bell. I was like, this is a bit different for this podcast. Normally I just start with a check-in. But I felt cool to do it, so it feels like the right thing to do. And yeah, overall, I feel good. I feel quite excited about this discussion we're going to have today. I know kind of the work that you do,
Hmm.
and I feel it's a relevant topic, which we'll go into in a minute or two. But yeah, I feel it's a relevant topic from my background and from what I've seen, and it'll be good to see your take from it. I know you work with a lot of clients yourself, and it'll
Hmm.
be good to see your perspective from the coach,
Mm.
the therapist kind of view versus someone who's been through it itself.
Mm.
In that sense, can you kind of tell us what you do, what kind of work that you do, and yeah, take it from there.
Right. So I don't really have a short answer for this.
That's what I
I
got.
s- have we got time? Great. How long is this, by the way? 2 hours?
It'll be roughly an hour to an hour and 15, 20 minutes.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. Just so I know how to pace myself. So I started working as a sort of coach and counselor for men, and this was partly I became quite involved in with a very kind of famous group of pickup artists. I won't say who, but after that, I was really quite not very happy with how they were coaching men to relate to women, and I started doing my own thing. And over time, it evolved. I realized that a lot of the work that I was doing was really related to mental health, and so a lot of my work took on a lot of elements of therapy. Um, and really, what I discovered is that a lot of men, it's not really that they're looking for women, a lot of men are lonely. And so a lot of my work became around community building. And from there, I started working with all sorts of people, no longer just men. I was working with refugees, I was working with activists, I was working with women. And so today, my work does kind of run that gambit of yes, there's a therapeutic, there's a coaching element, and then beyond that, kind of once there is a healthy baseline established, I would say, it moves on to community development. And underlying all of that, there is a kind of a theme of decolonization. So looking at the ways in which, whether you want to call that capitalism or white supremacy or discrimination, are kind of interwoven into a lot of our lives, especially as people of color, investigating that within ourselves, within how we relate to others, within our communities, investigating those. I don't know if untangling is the right word, but let's say untangling, and then creating spaces within ourselves and within our communities that enable change within a larger society. So it's a broad scope, but that is kind of what I do.
It sounds very intense, and I can imagine like once you kind of work with them, and it's almost like opening a can of worms that can
Mm.
go in different directions.
Mm.
What makes you interested in working with this kind of cohort of people?
When you say cohort, you mean refugees, activists?
Yes, yeah.
Mm, ooh, that's a tough one to answer. I guess a bunch of it is personal background. So I can I spoil a little the topic of the
Yeah, of course you
podcast?
can.
Yeah.
Yeah, you go for
Yeah.
it.
So
Yeah.
to spoil a little bit the topic of what we're talking about today, we're going to be talking about genocide. And we're going to be talking about that because I lived through a sort of a genocide of my people, although that's also a complex matter, back in Southeast Asia. And I didn't come as a refugee, but I very nearly could have been. And a lot of the people who I associated with war refugees, at least initially when they arrived in the country, I've always had a strong activism component to me. I'd love to say that that's simply my virtue of character, but I think I grew up around a lot of other activists, and so that's just something that's carried along with me throughout my life. Um, so I'd say that there is an element of familiarity with the activists and the refugees with whom I work. There is an element of familiarity of seeing kind of similar undercurrents within our lives. There is an element of I do a lot of my work is about change. It's about decolonization, and I feel like these are the two groups with which I can work with the best, and with which I believe we can effectuate the most change. I guess that's where my interest would come from.
And how do you work with these like people with decolonization? I know it's probably
Yeah.
spectrum things, but I'm just
So yeah,
curious.
it is a tough. I I work a lot with, so a lot of the therapy that I do is it's co-creative, which is one of the reasons why I shy away a bit from the word therapy sometimes or coaching because they can be quite directive. A
Mm.
lot of what I do is very co-creative. It's a lot of it is very. Have you ever worked with Kenny and his voice dialogue?
Yes, yes.
I use a very similar structure. So kind of interfacing with different parts of a human being to
Hmm.
look at what stories are being stored within the psyche, within the body, examining where those stories come from, unpacking and unlearning what's no longer true, challenging, why things are there in the first place, and then naturally finding ways to move forward, finding new ways of being, new ways of doing.
So, one of the things I wanted to really ask you was, how do you channel the anger and frustration of seeing genocide? I guess we're kind of witnessing something right now, and how do you channel that anger and frustration to make it more productive and, not let it consume you? Because growing
Mm,
up, I saw a lot of genocide, coming from, Sri Lanka, seeing a lot
mm,
of Tamil like families being thrown out of the country, going out as refugees.
yeah.
How do you witness that, see it, not really be able to do anything about it? You can you can be an activist and you can protest and you can do these things, but does it make a big difference? I can't say it did. So in that sense, how do you channel that frustration and that helplessness into something that could be more productive for the community?
Mm. That's a really big question. When the I don't want to say when the Palestinian genocide started, but after the ramping up of the situation following October 7th, I had quite a few emotional breakdowns where I just like I couldn't do it. I was having the type of cries where if someone had overheard me, they would be asking themselves whether it's a human being making those noises. I was wailing.
Mm.
Um, and part of that is stuff that, needs to come up and needs to be worked through. It's a complex question to answer. I mean, to some extent, I'm fortunate that because one of the things that I work on is community. I have a fantastic community, which is very diverse, very robust, and the ability to be able to sit with people from a similar background as me, who come from not necessarily genocide, but a lot of violence,
Mm.
question the questioning of statehood, and talk to them about that and be met there. And then to also, on the other hand, go to the other side of community where I met with, like white men and women from California who are, very wealthy, who have cottage homes, and also just being able to be like, I need your profile specifically. I need someone like you to witness this and to hear me and
Mhm.
to just be there for me while I talk this out and maybe cry. That's also just been huge, and just
Mm.
having people from really all walks of life. Then
Mhm.
then my story is real. It exists not just in myself. It exists in the minds, the hearts, and the lives of the people around me. That's one thing. That's a big thing.
Mm.
And that was
So that's
very
the
difficult.
community, is it? That's like having
Yeah,
people to see you, hear you, and understand you.
yeah. And
Yeah.
for me, I really draw the distinction between I need to be understood by people who are like me,
Hmm.
and that way I know that I'm not alone. And I
Mm.
need to be understood by people who are not like me. And that way I'm not boxed into like a special victims club. You know what I'm saying?
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Also, I had no idea you were a Tamil Sri Lankan. I knew you were Tamil, but I assumed you were from Tamil Nadu.
Oh no, no, yes, yeah, yeah.
I used to mix with a lot of Sri Lankans when I was younger, like Sinhalese and Tamil, so I'm quite aware
Yes.
of yeah. Beyond that, it's been, I think of this, I was turned on to this idea recently of a livelihood garden. Thinking of the ways in which we work in life, as different plants. So, for example, the three big plants I'd say the two big plants I have are I do community building and I do therapy and coaching, right? these plants are fed via a system of compost, and the compost is all metaphorical, right? The compost is basically made up of all of the things that I've tried to be, or which have happened to me, or which I've been, and which I am not anymore, right? And so my time as a pickup artist, the time that I've spent as a monk, the time that I spent studying psychology as a student, the time that I was just like a street urchin, all of these life experiences have fed into what I'm doing today, and they inform what I'm doing today, right? A lot of my work is decolonial because I've lived on two very different sides of the spectrum of that colonial process of like being, a person of color who is undergoing a genocide, which is a direct consequence of how we were organized and ruled over colonially. And on the other side of that, now being a citizen of a European country, being, I guess I'd say middle class, so coming from two very different sides, and all of that informs. And so to answer that question of how do I see what's going on and not become overwhelmed by rage, I mean, in part, I do. Sometimes I do. I do become overwhelmed by emotion. It is rage at first, but for me, very often it's grief really that I'm overwhelmed by. And I don't know if I can say that I don't, but even beyond that, I feel seen. I feel connected to my community. I feel connected to the people around me, and I'm aware that all of that I've experienced personally, that helps inform the work that I do. And I'm very deliberate about the people that I do it with, the activists and the refugees. And as one person, I work to do, whatever is within the limits of what I can do as a single individual to make the world a better place. But I'm also aware that in the work that I'm doing with refugees and in the work that I'm doing with activists, they're taking the tools that I'm giving them, and they're going on to give back to their own communities, to their own people. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. What would you say some of the tools are in that sense?
I mean, in terms of individual tools, I can talk about a lot. I can talk about the meditation, which I learned during the time that I spent as a monk. Or I can also talk about the meditation, like kind of the wash down meditation that we can sometimes get in the East. I can talk about the voice dialogue tool, which is very similar to what Kenny is using. I can talk about elements of what I'm doing, which are energetic or EMDR. But really, what I feel people are taking away from the work that they do with me is an ability to have more peace with themselves. So one of the themes of what I work is, have you heard of CPTSD?
No.
It's complex post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay.
If you've gone through something traumatic, you can have post-traumatic stress disorder. If your whole livelihood, has been one long, continuous, ongoing trauma, we say, in adulthood, you're suffering from complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So a lot of people who work with me, there is an undoing of that. There is a learning of a development of space within themselves. We say you exist between stimulus and response, and a lot of people who work with me get tools to kind of widen that space between stimulus and response and finding that presence or that peace in the middle, in the vacuum. And then there are tools on how to connect to other people, similar to what Kenny's doing in that sense, how to connect with other people beyond scripts, beyond power dynamics, beyond hegemonies, and how to share that with people, beyond yourself. So a lot of people who work with me, they feel more at peace. They have tools to share where they're coming from with those around them, and then they bring that peace and they bring those tools and they bring that idea of decolonization onward.
But it sounds like, obviously I'm just making it smaller, but it sounds like you're helping them find peace, and through finding peace within themselves, they're then able to build a community going forward with other people. And it's
Mm,
almost like you're taking that peace within you to other areas of life, and
mm.
therefore you're finding a way to kind of build a community other way, as opposed to like separating yourself from other
Yeah.
communities.
Yeah. And it's my hope that for a lot of people who work with me, that they take those tools and they share it with their community. And it
Mm,
creates a ripple effect.
it does, yeah.
Mm.
And it reminded me of a book I'm reading right now. It's called Thou Shalt Not Hate, and
Mm-hmm.
it's by a doctor from Palestine,
Mm.
who was also working in Israel, and he saw his family killed. His wife passed away. He saw his daughters also bombed, and despite that, his kind of way of thinking was he's gonna find a solution to the medical kind of doctor
Mm.
field and find a way to bring the community together. And he's still
Mm.
active right now, and there's a lot to do with seeing the bigger picture here, because I can imagine if you are in that victim state, if you are kind of focused on the rage, the anger, it's gonna consume you, the grief, it's
Mm.
gonna consume you to a point where actually it's not beneficial for you, your family, or even your community in that sense.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
totally.
and I do want to go into voice dialogue. I feel like it might be appropriate just for
Mm.
people who aren't aware. Do you want to
Mm.
kind of run through like a quick
Sure.
example? You can use me if you want me to as well.
I think it's easier to talk about it, isn't
Okay,
it?
yeah.
Because there is I guess in conventional therapy there is a system called internal family systems, and it's very
Hmm.
similar to voice dialogue. So people
Yes.
who know of IFS, they can figure out what voice dialogue is. But it's essentially a way of um, speaking to the different parts of an individual psyche. For example, we might say, I'd like to talk to the part of you that's carrying all of this, post-colonial rage, or I'd like to
Mm.
talk to the part of you that is hateful of men, or I'd like to talk to the part of you that is afraid of other people. And in the work that I do, I find that the first time most people tend to humor me. They're like, "Oh, all right, okay, I get it. It's like it's one of those role play therapies." And they get into the mood of it, and I'll ask questions, like, when did you start doing your job? Where did you learn how to do your job? What are the outcomes that you want for the whole person? And typically, not even towards the end of the session, maybe 10-20 minutes in, as we kind of finish the work with that part of the psyche and we revert back to the whole individual, they will say, "Oh, I said things to which I was not expecting to say, or which I
Mm.
was not wholly aware were there."
Hmm. Could you give
Hmm.
examples, or is that like without giving names of
Hmm.
someone? A common theme that you notice with someone who's kind of gone through this, who may be suffering from anger, rage, or grief.
Yeah. Well, the anger one is interesting because I've worked with a few people who have, I don't want to say anger issues, but yeah, who have a lot of anger in their lives.
Hmm.
And it's interesting that very often the part of anger is there to shelter the person from grief,
Mm.
because it's hard to feel anger and grief at the same time, and anger is almost a distraction from grief. And often when I ask the part of anger, what are you trying to protect this person from? The response is often the grief,
Mm.
the sadness, the emptiness, the realization that so much has happened, and we're a single person and there's nothing that we can change.
And moving that, I guess, towards kind of your own story, where
Mm.
you've kind of, well, I guess if you're happy to share a bit about your story of like what you've gone through, and then we can go into the other question.
Sure. So it's actually pertinent because an interesting person of interest in this is a man called, I believe his name is Gerald Butler.
Hmm.
He was a member of the British Psychological Operations team, part of British intelligence, I believe, and he was involved in the crushing of the Arab revolt in Palestine and the setting up of the Israeli state. And after that, because there was a power vacuum in Malaysia at the time, and there was infighting between the Malay nationalists, the Chinese communists, and the Indians, he was called in to employ the same tactics to kind of separate the people, so that the British could come in and reinstall themselves as the people in charge. He was quite famous for using a lot of, I guess tactics is the right word that we see today. So like displacement of ethnic groups. He was the first person. I believe, he was the pioneer of the use of he pioneered the use of Agent Orange, which was later used in the Vietnamese War by the Americans. He was a lot of headhunters, like bounty hunters, who would cut off people's heads and take them back as proof of where was I going with this? Yeah, so basically, he came into Malaysia and he set up this condition where the three ethnic groups were so divided between each other that they could not unite, to usurp the British. And a lot of propaganda was used. So the Chinese were told that, the Malays are lazy, the Indians are here to steal your jobs. The Indians were told that, okay, the Chinese are they're going to exploit you they're going to basically commit wage theft. The Malays are lazy, and then the Malays are told, oh yeah, the Chinese and Indians are just here on your land. It's your land, and they're temporary occupants. And after the British left, when we got independence in 1958, the country I'm talking about is Malaysia, by the way, if I had not made that clear. They didn't change any of that, and so that continued. And so there's this kind of three-way stalemate between the Malays, the Indians, and the Chinese within Malaysia. And on the ground, one of the consequences that you see is that, so I'm mixed, right? Which is also why it's difficult to call it a genocide, because I don't have like kind of a single genetic expression. I've got, so my mom is Chinese Malay. Well, my mom's predominantly Chinese, but she has a lot of Malay within her family. She's part of a people called the Baba Nyonya. So they were Chinese who immigrated independently of the British, and they mingled with the Malays. So there's already quite a lot of mix in their blood. And my father is Indonesian Indian. So my father, being mixed, also had huge problems with his ethnic identity. I did not learn that I was Indian until my teenage years, when one of my grandparents told me, because he hid it, which is what most mixed kids on the ground would do, because as a mixed kid, you're kind of unprotected, right? For example, if you're Chinese Malay, you're not really accepted by the Chinese side, you're not really accepted by the Malay side. So you're an easy target for victimization, for bullying, for assault. And so a common strategy that a lot of mixed kids take is that they will deny one part of themselves. They will say, okay, yeah, I'm Chinese Malay, but I don't like the Malays. I think they're dirty. Or I don't like the Chinese. I think they're too obsessed with money, right? And then you learn as much as you can about the culture of the other. And in that way, you kind of, you show that you're committing kind of treason against half of yourself and clearly picking a side. That's what my father did. I don't blame him, right? There are not a lot of good alternatives. But then coming to my term, I'm really mixed. I'm four-way mixed. I'm Indonesian, Malay, Chinese, and Indian. I did a DNA test a few years ago, and it's crazy. Like the Southeast Asia lights up like a Christmas tree. And so I was the victim of a lot of discrimination. I'm trying to think of concrete examples. I remember being spat on quite a lot. I remember the Chinese would call us Wu Shui Ren, which means like sewage blood, a person of sewage blood, of dirty blood, right? Like a mud blood, like in Harry Potter kind of thing.
Yeah.
What else? There's also a thing in Malaysia where the different ethnic groups have different rights in front of the law. And so people would think that I had access to multiple sets of rights because I mix. In reality, I don't really have access to any, because if I try to claim them, they're like, well, no, you're not Chinese. You don't look fully Chinese, or you're not. So I think in some circumstances I could claim one set of rights, but definitely not all. So even legally, at the level of the Constitution, there is discrimination on ethnic lines. Yeah, I could keep going. Remind me, what was the initial question? I got caught. I started
I guess we were talking about your story. So like, I guess
yeah.
because essentially, yeah, you've got,
Okay. I
yeah.
thought I thought for some reason I thought the question was what kind of discriminations did I experience in Malaysia? So yeah, my story. Yeah, I grew up mixed. I suffered a lot of discrimination personally. I was always quite contrarian. So I became involved in a lot of activism. Yeah, activist movements.
Was this
Uh,
at a
mo
young age, or was this kind of more so after your teenage, later years? Or
I think I was always kind of surrounded by activists, like I said before, but I think I did properly start to get involved when I was when I was about a teenager.
hmm
Mostly, I was involved with women's rights. I tried many different places to, you know, either start something or get involved with a movement for the rights of abolishing the
Mm.
that kind of ethnic divide that exists constitutionally. None of those movements ever developed much momentum because changing the constitution is a very difficult thing. Um, and I at some point I was assaulted by a group of people for being mixed. And it was a pretty bad one. I had to be holed up away in a doctor's. There was this doctor who always took good care of me, and I had to be holed up away in his attic for a while, partly for treatment, partly for safety. And
Mm.
at that moment, I told myself I can't keep staying here. And then I was fortunate enough that I put in a lot of work. I also had a lot of help that I was eventually able to leave the country. And
Mm.
it was after leaving the country that I came to France, and I've been living here since. That I kind of started to have the safety and the distance to kind of unpack what had been going on back in Malaysia. And I say unpacked, but really I didn't have the tools or the skills at the time. So I was really being tormented by what had happened and what had
Mm.
come to pass in Malaysia. And I was really at a point where I was very suicidal. And that's when I met Kenny, who's unfortunately not on this call, because
Mm.
Kenny works as a personal development consultant. That's what he calls himself.
Yeah.
And he survived a genocide back in Uganda.
Mm.
And after I met him, that was the first time where I had this feeling of, oh, okay, like monkey see, monkey do,
Mm.
like Kenny's gone through the same thing, and he's a well-adjusted, well-adjusted, well-developed individual, and so there must be a similar possibility for me. And so I started working with Kenny with his voice dialogue thing, and also there's some other stuff. Like I started facilitating men's groups. I started doing a bunch of other stuff, and then on the side I was doing other things. I was running with pickup artists. I was getting involved with something like there are highs and lows. Some of it is like, okay, yeah, great, that's a route that I followed, it really worked out. And some of it is like, okay, I'm kind of ashamed that I went down this path. It wasn't very fruitful, and it probably didn't do me or the people around me any good. But I guess that's kind of been my experience. It was bad in Malaysia. I was fortunate enough to get out. I was fortunate enough to meet someone who had a similar life experience
Mhm.
with which we could begin to unpack, and I could begin to kind of heal and recover. And once I was healed and recovered, the question was, I have all of this experience, and what do I do with it? And since then, that takes us back to where we were at the start of the interview, which is what do I do now?
And I've got so many questions, so many questions. The one thing that I want to ask you is, what did jumping into the pickup world give you? I've
Ooh.
been there too myself, and I guess for me it was about connecting and connecting with women and all of these things. But what did it give you in that sense?
I think part of it was me kind of trying to figure out my place as an Asian man in the Western world. I don't know if you agree with me, but I think Asian men in particular are not very well portrayed,
Mhm.
especially on the Western dating market. And so part of it was kind of in deference to that. Is deference the right
Mhm.
word? Yeah.
So
In
you wanted to
rebellion.
make a difference.
No, deference as in rebellion.
Fine.
I was
Okay.
like, oh, I don't like how people always look down on me because I'm an Asian man and I'm going to,
Mm.
figure out how to become a pickup artist and just like, there's a word for this, just like I just don't know what it is, but yeah, like a classic kind of, I'm not loved in the way that I want to be, and so I'm going to just like put in all of my essence into this thing,
Mm.
to show that I am worthy of love.
Or could you say
That
it was
was
pride a little bit? To
Yeah,
be
yeah, 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 definitely.
yeah.
Pride played a big part. That's definitely part of it. I'd say there was also an element of there was an element of community in it because really when I did it, I was in a point where I didn't have a lot of friends.
Mm.
And something that I found working with the pickup crew is that for a lot of people, the joy of it is not really the women. It's just having another, a group of men that you can meet and hang out with and feel like you're on the same path or that you have shared values. That's a huge thing for so many people who joined that space. What else went into it? I think those were the big things. Really, it was like, yeah, pride and community.
And yes, did it give you that pride that you wanted? Did it give you that sense of identity?
No, obviously not. uh, I did learn a lot from it. I learned a lot in terms of I would say that I kind of let go of a lot of complexes that I had around women.
Hmm.
Not because I was doing pickup, but just because pickup was forcing me to be around a lot of women a
Mm.
lot of the time.
Yeah.
Um, I've definitely picked up new complexes, that's for sure. I think I learned a lot in terms of people skills, really, because pickup,
Mm.
in a way, it's kind of marketing, isn't it? Except the
Yes.
product that you're trying to sell is yourself. Um, and so I learned a lot in terms of people skills, in terms of marketing, in terms of presentation. I did pick up a lot of good things from it. I would say, however, at the kind of ideological inner peace sense of self-worth level, it probably wasn't a good thing.
Interesting. Would you, because the stuff you talked about, talking about like being spat on, all of these things,
Mm,
is crazy. Like it's going to diminish anyone's self-worth. It's
mm,
going to question a lot of things. And then obviously you went in to pick up artistry as well,
mm,
which is to do with a lot of self-worth. Do
yeah.
you feel what you've gone to has, well, it has impacted your self-worth, but do you feel like what you've gone through has helped your self-worth where you are now today? Or do you feel like it's only because of the work you've done in terms of like self-help that you've been able to pick up the self-worth to the level you have today?
Sorry, what was the last part? It's only because of the work that I've done.
Yeah, like the seeing Kenny, the other kind of
Mm,
studying you've done that's helped you bring up your self-worth, or do you feel like there's other aspects that's helped your self-worth?
I think like if you asked me to paint the journey, I'd say that yeah, in when I was living in Malaysia, I had zero self-worth. Just being spat on, being called names by the adults all of the time, or being called dirty. Uh, yeah, it just left me with this sense of like inner disgust. Um, and then getting into pickup was also kind of it that kind of aligned with getting into like that the hustle culture thing, right? And then it was like, okay, no, actually, if I work my ass off and I can get the girls, then I'll be worth something. Then I'll have self-worth. Um, and then a lot of the work with Kenny and a lot of the work with men's groups that then became, oh, actually, I have self-worth all of the time. I have self-worth right now. I don't have to feel great or be great to have, inherent value. I can show up to whether that's a group or my friends and just be like, I feel like shit, I look like shit, I probably smell like shit, and still be like, and I am worthy of time and attention and space and, being treated as a human being. Yeah, yeah, I'd summarize it like that.
And I guess regarding that, going back when you were younger, how did
Mm,
you deal with it? Like, obviously, you probably weren't aware of what self-worth was like at that
mm.
time, but how did you, was it just survival at that stage, or was it like you couldn't even like survive, if that makes sense? You were just like clinging on.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was a teenager, it became a thing just because of puberty, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, I have to think back because I was also such a different person. I was such a different person 3 years ago. Sometimes I think back 3 years ago and I can't figure out why I made certain decisions. Um, I'd say when I was a teenager, a lot of the self. So when I was a kid, a lot of the self-worth was just around like, why don't my family members accept and love me, right? Not much that I could do,
Mm.
however. When I was a teenager, then it became, how do I run with the biggest and toughest like gangs? And so I was, hanging out with martial artists. I was hanging out with less savory people, but
Mm.
because they were big and tough and mean, and they accepted me because I'm very large for a Southeast Asian,
Hmm.
I derived some sense of status from there. And then I was fortunate enough that I put in work and I got to become a student. It's not I say that because it's not just a matter of hard work. I was very fortunate, very lucky. When I was a student, then the question was, how do I hang out with like the coolest crowds, you know?
Mm.
When I was after I graduated, when I was at kind of the beginnings of the workplace, no, actually, even at university, it was like, yeah, how do I get the hottest girl so that I'll have status, or how do I be like the best hustler so that I'll have status? And the past, how old am I? I'm 29. I think since 26. Wow. 9, 8, 7, 4 years. Yeah, it's like since the past 4 years, it's just been a lot more relaxed. It's just like, how do I surround myself with community that with which I have profound connections, who care about me and who are invested in making change. And that's now today where a lot of my, I guess, sense of, I don't know if worth is the right word, but identity has come from.
It sounds like you made like such a massive change. Like even like you said, last 3 years you made a big change.
Yeah.
Do the things that made you angry, like let's say when you were younger,
Mm.
still have the same potency as they do now? Or do you feel like you've got to a point where you understand the anger and you can kind of accept it and be like, okay, that's how I was, that's what I went to, I'm now a different person?
Hmm. That's interesting. Can you reformulate this question for me in a different way?
Yes. Do the things that made you angry, the
Yeah.
things that made you angry when you were younger,
Hmm.
do they still make you angry in the same way?
Hmm. For a lot of things, no. A lot of things that made me angry when I was younger just have no sway on me anymore. And I feel like a lot of that has just been because of acceptance of either the way things are or acceptance of myself. I think that
Mm.
by far and by large, the second one. Um, I'm thinking particularly right now I'm thinking of a few things actually. It's hard to narrow down. I'm wondering if I want to give an example of something that made, because so many things made me angry when I was young, but I'm trying to pick something meaningful amongst all of that like
Mhm.
garbage.
Pick one
Uh,
that pops up in your head. I don't. It's like I'm sure I'll tell you if it's a bad example.
I guess one of them was I was quite I was quite upset by how, even this is multifaceted. I was quite upset by the fact that all the women that I knew tended to have just much more robust friendships and connections and relationships than the men.
Mm.
And as a man, I was like, is this my life? Do I have to talk to people about football and and like make fart jokes? Like, is this all there is? Like, and it pissed me off. I
Mm.
was just like, um, and over time, I've realized that, okay, well, yeah, women do that in part to be safe, because the world is much more hostile towards them in many ways.
Mm.
Without wanting to get into patriarchy or toxic masculinity. Um, on the other hand, I realized that actually I have a responsibility. Responsibility is not the right word, but I can take responsibility. I can be accountable and develop the relationships that I want to see. And that took work to figure out how to kind of meet men in an illicit kind of like, their deeper, richer internal stories, and to share my own, and to develop and like forcefully cultivate relationships where we're hanging out on the basis of love, of experience, of emotion, and not on the foundation of sports, or not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just not my thing. Um, yeah, that was something that made me so upset, that it just seemed that other people had these like really robust, really nice friendships, and I just didn't have any friends or family who seemed to love me. And today, when I look back and I think of that child version of me, I am upset for him. I'm upset that people around him treated him that way. But I am not upset about the fact of it, if that makes sense. I'm upset for him.
So you're empathizing with the younger version of you, but
Yeah.
equally, the bigger picture of where you are now, and you're
Yeah.
happy with where you are now.
Yeah, I also don't like get like caught in this like loop into the past, and where I'm there and I'm like, oh, life has always been like this and it's always gonna be like this.
Yes, yeah.
I can kind of
Nice.
observe those emotions from safety. Sorry.
No. I was saying it's nice. Like it's the things I'm getting here are like it's almost like being at full acceptance of where you are right now, what's happened to you, but equally now looking at the future and be like, okay, I've gone through this, I've experienced this. This is what I've, you can almost say you've suffered through, but now you can say, okay, this is how I want to live my life, and this is where I want to go towards.
Yeah, there is quite a lot of acknowledgement and taking of responsibility without self-pity.
Fine, yeah. So, fine, yeah. So without the victimization in that sense.
Yeah, the self-victimization, yeah.
So it's interesting that you've said about the woman, because it also, I guess, relates to PUA, because you're working with interacting with women on a whole new level, and I'm trying to understand them on a whole new level. Growing up, like with your parents, did they kind of understand what you were going through? Were they able to kind of comfort you at all, or was it quite difficult?
I think my mother understood to some extent what we were going through, but she was also unable to do anything because my father was quite abusive. My father was also just like, he was part of the problem. I remember very often being trapped in like small spaces or rooms or car interiors with him, and him telling me that everything disgusting about me was because I was Chinese. And I remember once saying like, you chose to marry a Chinese woman, not me. And he just slapped me across the face. So he was definitely part of the problem. Like there was no kind of solution or comfort going to come from him. And who can blame him? He has his own, like I said with the Indian thing, he has his own kind of just ethnic, exactly. He has his own kind of like real internal strife about his ethnicity, and that's just being projected onto his kid. Yeah, I mean, it's also the thing, like I said, a lot of mixed kids do take this route of they abandon half of themselves. Some of them are very lucky in the sense that they have a accepting family, and they're also good with languages and cultures and code switching, and they can kind of blend into both. There are mixed kids in Malaysia who have happy existences. I'm not denying that. Part of it was I think I took after my dad in the sense that I was just a very angry and very contrarian child, and when I saw kind of the world treat me unjustly, I would spit back at it. That did not help. Which I realize now, but I mean, as a kid, I didn't know any better.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
The whole story seems really cool, actually. Like, it's almost like you're born with all these different identities, which is in itself really cool. But then it's almost like that identity was taken away from you, and you're made to feel like ashamed. But equally now it's almost like you formed this new identity of who you are. You feel you sound, and from when I met you in person as well, you found very like, just with yourself, very confident, maybe accepting of yourself as well. Do you feel that way as well?
Yeah, I do. Although it's been like a huge journey to get here, but thank you. Yeah. I think earlier when we were talking about that issue of self-worth and how my relationship to my self-worth has changed over the years, I think at some point there was an acknowledgement of I've actually done so many things, and it's true that I did most of them out of like a kind of a seeking identity or seeking of a place of belonging. But I was there, during those things, whether it's, when I was working as a monk, when I was a student, when I was starting, my work developing communities in Europe, when I was working as a pickup artist. I was there and I did learn things. I did take skills. I did, collect life experiences. And a lot of what I've been trying to do, and I guess a lot of what I'm trying to do now, is I have this wealth of experience and I would like to share it, and I would like to share these tools with people so that they can make sense of, their own kind of worlds, their own kind of, like I said, the decolonization process, and become their own person.
And you mentioned the monk. I don't think we've touched that today, but
Yeah.
what was that all about? Like, was that before the
Um,
pickup stuff? Was it after you moved out of Malaysia? Or
that was when I was in Malaysia.
Mhm.
It was after I was attacked quite badly as part of this ethnic hate crime. It feels so cheap to call it that, but that it's a good descriptor, so let's go with it. I needed a place that so like I said, I was a very young, very angry child. Often if people spat on me, I would pick fights.
Mhm.
If I had picked a fight on someone and I lost, I would come back. I would burn things that they owned. I would commit minor arson, basically, aggravated assault in the street. I was just not popular. I was very angry all the time. And again, looking back, I had good reason, but still. After that big, I was attacked partly because I had made such a negative reputation for myself that people
Mm.
actively came after me, and also just because, like I said, things with my family, my father was not going to be a part of any kind of constructive solution, and my mom was just overwhelmed dealing with my father and also kids, and also just like not having money. I didn't have people looking after my back. I was always looking after myself, and so I was attacked by a group. I was overwhelmed. And that moment was kind of my wake up call, where I realized, oh, okay, I've been angry for these 16 years of my life. I've probably had good reason to, but it's probably not a sustainable solution, and I
Mm.
need to figure something out. So in Malaysia, religion is also used as a tool of control and division. You've got you've got the Muslims, you've got the Christians, you've also got the Hindus. Though there's another one, but I don't wanna
That's fine.
give it the wrong name, so I'm going to skip it. But yeah, there are like a few large religions, and a lot of them have tried to convert me, which I also didn't like.
Mm.
I felt like that was selling out at the time. I felt like that was okay. Abandon your ethnic identity, take on this religious identity, and you'll be fine. And I thought, like, I could understand why people would do it, but I thought it was selling out. I didn't appreciate it. But one of the only religious groups that never tried to convert me were the Buddhists. And so when I was in this time of just like, I need to really change things about myself, I did not know what a therapist was at 16. Also, given my educational background, I went to the monastery, and I learned later that apparently there's a long process to get in. It takes a year or 2 years. I apparently skipped the line by going straight in. I found one of the monks and I prostrated myself and I begged him. And we had this conversation. I told him my story up to that point, and he took me in. And I don't think I was properly ordained, but there was some kind of ceremony, and I was there every day for almost a year, mostly doing cleaning duty. The other monks didn't like me because I learned later because I had skipped the process. But yeah, that's kind
And how
of
long was that period?
like 6 to 8 months really. And then
Nice.
there was a weaning off process where eventually I got kicked out. I say I got kicked out. No, they were very nice about it. They talk about like dharma in
Mm.
Buddhism,
Yes, yeah.
like your place in the cosmic order. And basically, one of the senior monks, he sat me down. He said, like, listen, Namora, for some people, their dharma is within the monastery, and for some people, it is outside of the monastery. I was thick as shit, so I didn't understand that they were kicking me out. He had to like rephrase it a few times before I was like, "Oh, I have to go," and he was like, "Yeah."
How did that experience change you? Like, you went from that, that kid with so much rage, you
Mm,
went to this phase of like being a monk. How did
mm.
that change you?
In some ways, it was in some ways, I got this experience of, okay, I learned how to meditate and I learned a bunch of different tools for what is basically self-regulation. And that was a game that in itself was a game changer. On the other hand, I also learned how to kind of like hide the parts of myself with which I'm ashamed under this identity of being a monk, which was not a good thing, and that had to be unlearned many years later. But it changed me in the sense that I was no longer angry. I did have this mild air of superiority, which back I like thinking back that for the people around me must have been really annoying. I'd say yeah, it didn't really deal with my anger though. I kind of swept my anger under the carpet. Like some of it was dealt with self-regulation, but a lot of it was swept under the carpet, and a lot of that anger was actually dealt with like 4 or 5 years, like not even 4, 2, 3 years back.
Mm.
So that's been quite a recent thing, that kind of remembering and then unlearning again.
Cool. Just being aware of time,
Oh yeah.
I've got a question for you, and that is, let's say there's someone out there who's gone through similar things what you've experienced. They've gone through war, they've seen families killed, all of these things. What advice, based on your own journey, would you give to them in terms of like being able to find peace again or finding themselves again? And I know it's complex, but if you could lay out a small path based on your own experiences, what would that be?
That is a rough one. That's a difficult one to answer. I think for me, what really helped me is having community, and I really hesitate to say that because I'm I'm blessed now that I have a wonderful community, just like in terms of how caring it is, how large it is, and how diverse it is. But not everyone has that. Very few people actually have that, even people who are middle class. But for me, the big thing that really allowed me to make space for so much change was being able to grieve in my community.
Mm.
I want to say that, part of me wants to say something like, I don't know, keep going, it's gonna be okay. But that's also not always true. And I don't want to be denying or belittling, very harsh realities that people can be living through. But for me, the two big changes were acknowledging what had happened and grieving it, and being surrounded by community. And I guess that does lead into a lot of what I'm doing myself, which is I'm helping people acknowledge their own grief, and I'm helping people surround themselves with their own community.
Nice.
Yeah.
And that answered the question perfectly.
Thank you.
Cool. We'll do a little checkout round. So, is there any kind of last words or thoughts in your mind that you want to share?
I almost want to ask where you are with all of this, because I don't mind having shared so much, but I was also hoping to learn something about you.
Yeah, sure. Where am I with this? So I guess it was Genocide. I've grown up with it. I think my parents used to, always watch the news, being updated about what's going on, and we have family in Sri Lanka as well. Who are affected, who are okay, everyone is good. But I guess I was thinking about this the other day because my dad and my sister are actually in Sri Lanka right now. They've gone to visit for a wedding and they've stayed there. My mum couldn't make it just for work. But my sister, is the first time she's been to Sri Lanka, and she went to she went to see all the families there. And there's this one grandma who's basically my grandma, so my mum's sister. I think younger sister too. Only a few years younger. My grandma's 93. I think she must be like 90. And she went there, and then they were talking, and she was talking to this grandma, and I was like, she was talking to this grandma, and she took a video as well. And she was like saying, "Yeah, look, this is my grandma. This is your sister," and showing a video. And that grandma started crying. It's like, "Oh, I haven't seen her for years, and they haven't seen each other for probably more than 34 years now." Wow. And in my head, I was thinking like, wow, like. I think that's when it affected me, because I was like, oh, wow, like this is the impact of genocide. Like you have siblings who are born together, who live their childhood together, and they don't see each other for 34 years because of a war, because of like genocide, because of like people having to leave as refugees, all of these things. So in my eyes, I don't think it's affected me literally where I've seen people I love die in that sense. I've seen mass communities die, and I think for me, it's part of me is like, 'cause I have a strong identity to being Tamil as well. So I would say part of me wants to help more people who are Tamil who have gone through genocide, but equally, I'm also like, there's a feeling of helplessness because even now I'm thinking, is there anything that I could actually do that could be more beneficial? Is there anything I could do that is, I guess, helping people? I guess one of those things is this podcast and talking about it. But I guess, yeah, on a more human level, like, is there anything I can actually do to stop conflict in the future, stop genocide, or is it something that we will have to kind of witness? And it's almost like we can help people that are in our circle, in our communities, but can we actually stop future genocides from happening?
Yeah.
And even that concept of like the fact I can't help them brings up kind of internal anger and rage for sure.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I think just the other day, maybe even yesterday, I was just kind of pondering that too, like going through the same motions, just being like, this is terrible, and I'm grateful that I'm in a place where I can give back and I can, do something that's meaningful, but also like, is this ever going to end?
Yes,
You know? Yeah.
And I guess, even saying all of that, it kind of brings up all this kind of anxiety, tension in me. So, so I guess in that sense, from what you've said, I guess it's building communities like this, being able to discuss it. And I guess sitting with this kind of internal frustration and learning to accept it. Would you say that's something that's useful?
Yeah, definitely useful. Learning to sit with your emotions, learning to accept accept how things are and then work from there. Very useful. Also, way easier said than done.
Yes. It is way easier said than done. And the other thing that pops up in my head actually before we end this is what I was speaking to Josh, who's also from men's group, and we were saying like so many people have, like I know so many people who are like active, who are trying to make a change, who are still promoting things, and still like there's still memorial days for people who have passed away, and all these people are making an effort to change and taking that anger, that rage that they've experienced into something more productive in that sense. And they may not see a benefit from learning to go back and visit the past memories and learning to grieve, learning to sit with it, acknowledge it. What I want to say advice. I don't know if advice is the right thing, but yeah, advice would you say to them to help direct them to actually sitting with those emotions and being comfortable with it?
Oof.
What would be your motivational talks to them?
Excuse me. Man, you're really laying it on me. I don't know. I do think that it's so important to go into the past, to grieve, and to accept. Again, that's so much easier said than done. But I've seen the effect that it's had on not just my life, but my community when I hadn't done that, right? I used the word Special Victims Club earlier, and that's because even though I'd come out from a lot of it, there was still so much, and I imagine there still is stuff which is unprocessed, that I just could not really develop friendships with people who I considered too privileged, because I was so attached to that identity of I am this kind of wretched child, and that is, at some level deep down, that was my identity. And I was hanging out with refugees, I was hanging out with queer people, I was hanging out with people who were, in some way or other rejected by society. And to be fair to younger me, it is difficult to create a space where all of these people feel comfortable. And I did do that. On the other hand, if I remain stuck in that, that's a special victims club, and we weren't necessarily doing anything productive. There was a lot of love, there was a lot of care, but there wasn't a lot of purpose. There wasn't a lot of there wasn't the same level of activism that there is now. And as I eventually realized, okay, I do need to kind of come to terms with a lot of things which have happened in the past and acknowledge that, yes, they have happened to me, but that doesn't, confirm me any kind of special right or special privilege or a sense of righteous justice, which is a big one, because a lot of it shows up as a righteous justice. It happened to me, and so I know what it's like, and I feel right in brandishing this sword the way that I do. Going back and working with that, I've been able to develop relationships with people nowadays who are considered very privileged, people who are earning, like, I'd say 7 figures a year, people who are, like on this, what do you call it, the seaboard, the C level, like CEO, CFO, CIO of like very big companies, who have huge apartments in the center of Paris. And I'm not saying that to be glamorous about it, but I'm saying that to say that if I can, now that I'm friends with them, something that I'm doing now that I can be friends, and now that I can have relationships, and now that I can build networks with these types of people, something that I'm doing now is I'm plugging in a friend who has been working with kind of developing love for the Arabic language and Arabic culture in France, and I'm trying to plug him into, people who don't necessarily have the same, let's say, cultural capital, but who have a lot more financial capital. And there is a trade that can be made there. So for my work, as a therapist, as a coach, as a community builder, I have seen how just, not looking at these things, not, taking the time or making the space to grieve and sit with these things, has shown up and has limited, my ability to work with my clients, my ability to feel at peace and at ease with myself. And it's also shown up in the types of communities that I'm surrounded in, and it shows up in the types of communities that I can form. And in dealing with them, so much more of life opens up to me, and with more of life available, I can, I have more space to move, I have more space to make things happen.
Nice.
I guess that's my motivational speech.
Yeah, perfect. That's brilliant. Perfect. Thank you for coming on. I really enjoyed having you on, and I've enjoyed this discussion. And yeah, even speaking about, I guess, how I'm feeling with everything related to my past, I've definitely felt acknowledged by you, and hopefully we can have more of these talks in the future, and I'll invite Kenny on as well at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to. And I'm very grateful that you invited me on. I've been very happy to be here. It's always interesting for me to kind of unpack my past, because I feel people always ask different questions and I look at things from different angles. Same. I've really enjoyed this discussion. I'd love to be on again with Kenny. That would be a laugh. Yeah.
For people who are trying to contact you, who want to work with you, what are your details and where can they find you?
So I'm mostly on Instagram. I've started a TikTok recently. They both have the same account handle, which is Sunflower Namora. So sunflower, like the plant, and Namora just being my name. So Namora. I have a website, although I think that's going down. It needs to be changed to so I wouldn't use that. But yeah, get to me on Instagram. I just got TikTok. I don't know if it has a messaging system, but you can also probably find me on TikTok shortly.
Perfect. Cool. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.